It's Classic FM 97.3 and the time is 8 o'clock. And you know what time it is? Time for Doctors on Air with Dr. Pamela Ajayi. And she's here with us as always. Good morning, Dr. Pam.
Good morning.
Good to have you. And this morning, what would we be talking about?
This morning, we're going to be talking about epidemics. And we actually want to use this opportunity to celebrate our heroine, Dr. Ameyo Adadevoh. As you know, it's been 10 years since her passing, really on behalf of all of us from Ebola. So it's a very important episode. And we have with us Professor Shade Ogunshola, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos and a very eminent microbiologist.
Good morning, Dr. Falashade.
Good morning.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, before we go on with Dr. Shade, let's just take this message from Pathcare. We'll be right back.
Numbers.
The choices you make today could determine the future.
Your numbers tell if your blood pressure is high or your blood sugar level is stable or not, even your cholesterol balance.
Regular tests is very important. However, if you don't know your numbers,
get tested today by visiting your doctor, clinic, or simply call
0700.
All right, make sure you get tested to know your numbers. So
yes, that's very important. Thank you so much. Professor Ogunshola, this is a very special program. It seems that the world is in a turmoil, but we keep having one epidemic after the other. We had COVID, we had Ebola, and now we're having monkeypox. Can you tell us, what are all these epidemics? Because a lot of people are worried. They don't know what's going on. Why do they keep happening? We have cholera. Now we're hearing about monkeypox. Can you explain to us what's an epidemic and why does it keep coming around?
An epidemic is when you have, I'm going to try and not be technical, when you have disease that's spreading within our community. And so you're having more cases than you would have at the normal time. So suddenly there's a spike and it is growing. That's
Dr. Falashade?
So she was talking about the issue of epidemics and how it forms and the organisms come into being. They come up, they go out, and they somehow create huge problems in around the world. But I think also one of the things I'd like to emphasize or talk about really is something that's close to my heart. And that's the issue of Dr. Ameyo Adadevoh, who passed on 10 years ago on Monday, really literally saving us from Ebola. And so the question or the issue is, how much can we celebrate her? This episode or this program is really meant to do that. Professor Ogunshola, perhaps you want to carry on.
yes.
You were talking about epidemics.
Go on, Doctor. Dr. Ogunshola? All right.
I seem to be having a problem with my recording, with my connection. So
We can hear you. We can hear you now. We can hear you.
you can hear me now. Okay.
Yes, we can hear.
Thank you. So it's important. It's interesting. I spoke about Dr. Ameyo this morning, and I thought about what she did, and the courage she showed, and the selflessness she showed. In fact, I thought about it and thought, she was made for a time like this. If Dr. Ameyo had not done what she did, Nigerian story would have been totally different, considering the speed at which Ebola is transmitted and the overcrowding. So I felt Dr. Ameyo Adadevoh is a heroine of our time. And I think she must be celebrated because there's so much that she inspires in all of us. I believe that what she did is the best in human nature, and we should all be inspired by her. And what happened with Ebola and her, I would say, giving her life for Nigeria, also highlighted the need for us to be prepared for epidemics. Highlighted the need for us to put in place the preventive measures that would ensure that healthcare worker death is not the heralding of a new epidemic. Because it's when people who are ill in the community come to hospital and doctors are dying, or nurses and other healthcare workers, from the infection, the epidemic that was brewing, that was not known, that we suddenly realize something is going on. But oftentimes, healthcare workers will pay with their lives. And because of what happened during Ebola, Nigeria has become more prepared. Are we prepared enough? Not yet. It is a journey. And I think celebrating her today gives us also a chance to look back and say, communicable diseases will always happen, but can we get more prepared and prevent more deaths? Thank you.
Thank you. So going back to the definition of epidemics, so that people can understand why it keeps happening. Because, I think, again, I can mention Lassa fever, I can mention meningitis. What makes these organisms suddenly come up and sort of run loose amongst our populations and puts us all at risk?
I think there are many things going on. In the initial stages, and when we had epidemics before, or when we say having epidemics, it was people coming and living together. You need to have a state in which people are living together. And then we realized that when you live together, it means as a nation, as people, we then have to ensure that the things that would breed microorganisms, like poor water, poor sanitation, poor housing, overcrowding, needs to be taken into consideration and need to be addressed. And so you'll find that in the European nations at that time, when they put public health structures, infrastructure in place, and we had all these, epidemics seem to have stopped. It was so great then that in the 1960s, late 1960s, they believed that the infectious disease era was over. However, microorganisms are everywhere. What we then realized was that as our population grew, we then started to invade, I would say, the ecological spaces of animals. We were going into areas we were not going to. We were cutting down trees. And so we were beginning to have a mix of the animals and humans. And then we were degrading the earth. And then suddenly climate change, it's not sudden, it was growing, became an issue. We're having flooding, we're having changes in temperature, which was also changing the way the vectors, the animals, the insects started to behave. Places were getting warmer. So mosquitoes that could not breed where there was cold weather suddenly could move there and flourish. So even in Nigeria, West Africa, where we had Lassa fever, it was moving out of its traditional areas, and we're beginning to find it all over the place. Although that is a factor of not just climate change, but also movement of people. So the other thing that happened was development. We moved. We could now move. We could move from one country to another within an hour. And microorganisms just took a ride. So you could move from populations that were immune to populations that were totally not immune, infect them and start a chain. So there are so many things going on, and it became clear that we need to do more than just pay lip service to health. Prevention is really key. We need to take care of our public infrastructure. So now we have cholera epidemic, and are we surprised? There's a lot of open defecation. Sanitation is poor. There are many slums. Safe water. Many people are just using well water, borehole untreated water, although boreholes usually go further down, but in some places they're not that deep, and then you have the huge population explosion in Nigeria, and it continues to grow. So all the ingredients, poor public health facilities, climate change, huge population, continuous migration are in place for microbes to flourish. And so, and the mix between human beings and animals continue to grow. And some of these are beginning to have the ability to cross over. Thank you.
Okay, no, I think that's very, I think educational, because I think a lot of people really don't realize and understand how these things develop, how these things grow. But if I can ask again now, or perhaps ask you to narrow down on monkeypox, because this is a whole new thing that has come up, and people are saying, what is this again?
Well, monkeypox is actually not new, but the incidence went down because it belongs to the family of smallpox. And so when we eradicated smallpox, monkeypox, because people were vaccinated, monkeypox sort of essentially, I won't say disappeared, but sort of went into a basin. But it's continued to be, around. And I think about, but gradually we started to see an increase in monkeypox, because when we did the vaccination for smallpox, because monkeypox is in the same family, but milder, we seem to have taken care of monkeypox. And then we eradicated smallpox. And then people stopped being vaccinated against smallpox. And as the immunity waned, we started to see monkeypox come up again. So it has been around, actually, the incidence has been rising. And I know that I think it was 2017-ish, we have some places in the world that we know are endemic for monkeypox, most of which are in Africa, the DRC, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, where endemic. So we do get the odd case. What's changing now is that the incidence is rising, and it is going into countries that previously were not endemic for monkeypox. So why? I'm not sure I know exactly, but I'm sure part of it will be migration. Part of it will be, we have this new, it's not a new clade, but the clade that we have two types in general, a milder one and more virulent one, I would say. The more virulent one is the one that we find normally in the DRC, which is Central Africa. And the milder one, which is the clade 2, is West Africa. What we're seeing is a spread and a change in the behavior, or should I say a spread of the clade 1B that's coming from the DRC. And why is it spreading? The immunity against smallpox is waning. So people are looking at both. If monkeypox is right, so that those who are immune to monkeypox are reducing in the world because we stopped vaccinating against smallpox. So when you look at the people who are more likely to be affected, they're usually young people. In fact, a comparison they showed that was done in a study that was done in 2016. I think that was in, I think it was in DRC, showed that cases decreased with age, and what you then found was that those who were vaccinated were less likely, against smallpox, were less likely to get monkeypox. So what we're seeing really is that the herd immunity against smallpox is gone, which was protecting us against monkeypox. And in the period, a lot of movement has occurred. And but we're watching, why is this suddenly moving like this? So people are looking at it, that are there more changes in this monkeypox? But so far, it's not it does not cause death per se. I think in Nigeria so far, we've had about 39, we have under 50 cases and no deaths. And I think the Africa CDC came up that in Africa, we've had about 2,800 plus cases and only about 517 deaths, I think. And most of these had other problems, you know, being diabetic, had other comorbidities that made them susceptible in general. So I think we're just seeing a combination of a lot of things happening at the same time. Yeah.
No, I think quite encouraging and relieving. I'm sure a lot of people are a bit relieved. But what about COVID? We had COVID before. COVID was virulent. Now there are rumors. COVID is back. COVID is worse.
No, COVID never went. COVID is not back. COVID did not leave. We just became more immune. It's going to settle down to be one of the flus we will get occasionally, you know, but it will never be like it was when it came fresh. You know, when the herd immunity was almost non-existent, right? So you will find that people are still going to get COVID. Let's be very clear. And it's going to develop its own pattern.
Okay, can you just explain to us? So just say, this is how it was when it started. This is where we are now, and this is where it's going, so that we have an idea of what your thought on COVID, so that people can understand it. Because people thought, you know, they made us take vaccines. We thought it was all over. Where is it coming from now?
Oh, no. COVID is a virus, and it came in. It's a flu. And so it's just going to join the army of flus. Why it was so virulent and so terrible was because we had not come in contact with it before. So our bodies and our systems had no protection. So it could go the full gamut of its possibilities. That's what you could sort of say. So what vaccines do is that they shore up your immunity so that the COVID, if you come in contact with COVID, your body can fight it. It does not always win the battle, but once you fought it at one time and you fight it again, you continue to get stronger so that the impact in terms of health becomes, you know, lower. It becomes lower. So people, if, for example, if you introduce COVID into a population that had no access, you know, had never come close to it, maybe practically everybody could die. But now you would fall ill and you would recover. And it will continue like that, except for people who have a reduction in their immunity. Some people might just be, you know, there will be some individual differences. It's like malaria. Some people never seem to get malaria. Some people get it a lot, you know, but generally what we will now see is that COVID for most people will be just like another cold or another flu, but it would probably impact more the very young, the very old, whose immunity is waning, and people with comorbidities will probably get the impact more. So if you still, and we will start to get a sense of when COVID shows up more. You know, what time of the year do we get COVID? But it will become like influenza. I mean, influenza has been around for, you know, hundreds of years, if I would say. And people are still getting vaccines for it, for the old people. So that's what we're going to have. COVID didn't go away. Its impact just waned. So it's going to become just another disease, like chickenpox, like measles, like flu, like the common cold, but they'll all have different levels of virulence. But for most people, it will no longer be a problem.
But now, for example, they say that, well, maybe it's like the flu is on the rise again. Are there any measures people should be taking to protect themselves? Should we start using masks again? Should we?
Yeah, and avoiding the same thing. Really. Well, let me say vaccines helped and vaccines worked. And we know that COVID starts to rise towards the dry season. So it, you know, the increase is usually around November, December, January, February. That's at least from what we saw, the pattern we saw during the epidemic in Nigeria. So it seems to come up December, January, February. And I think the peak incidence was usually around February. So we're going into COVID season. And I think it also is impacted because that's when we go into party season, when we're congregating in weddings and, everything is happening. December is wedding season. We're large groups of people. So anybody with sniffles and so on really should assume COVID until proven otherwise. And so don't go there and infect everybody. Wear your mask, avoid crowded areas. And if you're susceptible, you have diabetes, you have other diseases that make you not so strong, avoid crowded places. People were saying things like, oh, the point is church, but there are huge numbers of people there, so avoid them. That's when you do your online church if you're susceptible, and so on. Malaria and cold is a flu, and the flu is COVID, so because we use fever, any fever we assume is malaria. No. So if you have a malaria and tract infection at the same time, you have a flu. So go avoid, that is when to take, to be careful of infecting other people.
Yes, so often we hear, how are you doing? I'm not feeling well. I have malaria and catarrh.
Yeah, that's flu.
And I say, that's a flu. I think people just need to get that understanding of flu into our nomenclature in Nigeria, because we're just so used to malaria.
Yeah.
Nobody is used to flus, even though flus come and go, as with everywhere else.
Yeah.
So talking about epidemics, thank you so much. I think we've talked a bit about COVID now, we've talked a bit about the cholera, we've talked a bit about monkeypox. Another one that worries us, particularly in Nigeria, because this one pops up and pops down a lot, similar to Ebola and what we discussed with Ameyo is another condition, but it's a bit milder, but it's still as worrying, which is Lassa fever.
Yeah.
Can you tell about Lassa fever and why is Lassa fever? They say it's a Nigerian disease. Why that? And what can we do about it?
It is not a Nigerian disease. It was first discovered in Nigeria, in the north, in Lassa. And that's why I think that we call it a Nigerian disease, but it isn't. I think the thing with Lassa fever is that it usually starts when you have it's related to a little rat, that carries the virus. And this rat, the name has gone, Mastomys, anyway, it doesn't matter. Mastomys rat carries the virus in its, and it's not affected by it in its, sorry.
And it's blood?
Well, it's body fluids, let's just put it at that. So it urinates, it comes, so during harvest time, when they cut when they are harvesting, the rats move out of the fields that was traditional, into the holes, and people could get infected. And then people could transmit from person to person, which is not as efficient as with Ebola, so but then you can then pass it by body fluids, in particular blood. So what we're seeing now, and again, it comes down to all the reasons we said earlier, is that in the last maybe 2 decades, the cases have increased, and the states that are affected by Lassa fever in Nigeria have increased, which we believe has to do with increased movement, and that the rats themselves are moving from their traditional locations to other cities. So, which of course, rats are like, I want to use a word like microbes. They catch a ride. So now we have lots of cars, we have lots of big trucks taking food, and so the rats took their ride and went that's the way I explained it. So Lassa fever is not as infectious, but it is pretty infectious, but it also has, it's transmitted by body fluids, particularly blood. And so the good thing about these ones that are transmitted by body fluids is that they're more easily avoided, whether in hospital or in the community, because if you wash your hands, you don't touch body fluids, then the possibility of catching them is less. Unlike the flus, where you can't see them, it's just somebody coughs into the air, you breathe it in, or they cough into your face, you breathe it in, or you put it in your, you touch dried body fluids that are on surfaces, you rub your nose and you inhale some of these things, and those you can't see, but you can see. And the good thing also is that those who have Lassa fever, you can see that they're ill, so you can avoid them. Again, with Ebola, you become infectious when you're ill. So Lassa fever is not just Nigeria. We have it across the whole of West Africa, and we've exported it to a few other countries around the world as well. The good thing though is that if you take a drug called ribavirin early, you can stop the symptoms. And the other part of it is that Lassa fever is not as deadly. Many more people recover, although they may recover with sequelae like deafness, etc. But it isn't a Nigerian disease. It's very similar in presentation as Ebola, but it's less deadly, less virulent, but it does kill. It does kill.
Yeah, so thank you. I think we've had Dr. Niniola Williams join us from the Drassa Foundation. Welcome, Niniola. And to this special edition where we are celebrating Dr. Ameyo Adadevoh and talking about epidemics in general. The Drassa Foundation is here. So actually, before I go on to talking to you, I don't know if you can unmute and also speak. Can you talk a bit about the celebration of Ameyo that has been done recently, and just also a bit about what the Drassa Foundation is doing?
Yes, good morning, Dr. Ajayi. Good morning, Prof. It's great to be here. I think this week was a significant week, of course, marking 10 years since she died. And so for us, we really wanted to do something that would bring people together to have a conversation, to reflect on what has happened in the last 10 years in the health sector, and also some of the gaps and issues that we still need to address. And really, our celebration was tied into our reason for being as an organization, which is to strengthen the health sector as regards infection prevention and control, a key part of quality, safety, and healthcare delivery. And so for us, the event on Monday, we had several experts that we invited to come and share with us on IPC and patient safety. And the idea was, how do we look at what has happened over the last 10 years, how IPC has grown in the country, how we have made great strides and done so much work. Prof. Ogunshola is, of course, one of our leaders in this space, and how can we also still look at what needs to be done? And so understanding that the Ebola outbreak in Dr. Adadevoh's hospital was due largely to the lack of IPC at the time, we are committed to ensuring that IPC becomes institutional across the country.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof, as well, for what what everyone is doing, reading. There's a new book out from the former DG of NCDC, Chikwe Ihekwazu, called An Imperfect Storm, which also, I think, highlights a lot, obviously from the COVID era, not back to what it is that you're talking about. So I'm hoping, Niniola, that you at Drassa will also write a book and, publish it, so a lot of people can find out what happened at the time, and I think gather some information from people at the time, and also, send it out to us. Or have you already published a book and I'm not aware of it?
Not yet, but it's in the works, so you're spot on.
Okay, fantastic. Prof,
Yeah.
thank is there, always working in front. And I think it's so great, a very deadly space, and people don't appreciate it. Even things as simple as TB, we don't consider TB. I don't know why they don't consider TB an epidemic, to be honest. I think it's the oldest, most long-standing epidemic in the world. But you know, hospitals. Sorry, carry on, Prof.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Sorry. Yeah. That in Nigeria, it's also one of the biggest epidemics in Nigeria, and we don't talk about it. We treat it, but we don't. We're not strong in ensuring that we have all our hospitals able to prevent transmission, even within that space, you know. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Definitely. Unfortunately, you won't believe this, but our time is up. I just want to say a very, very big thank you to both of you for coming on at such short notice to really, you know, celebrate, as I said, Dr. Ameyo Adadevoh, and talk about epidemics and give a deeper understanding to people about what is going on out there. And I hope I'll be able to call on you to perhaps talk a bit more. I think, Prof, we need to do something, perhaps these very important issues that unfortunately only seem to get brought up when there's a sort of like panic and a crisis mode, but need to be talked about more and more, and issues dealt with as a whole. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe for new video updates.